Her daughter burned her last gift from her late husband, laughing as silk turned to ash. Maggie Rollins, widow and former insurance professional, didn't raise her voice. Brianna, 34 and still living on her mother's credit, called it intentional. By month's end, she'd have no cosigner, no lease, and no way to borrow a dime. Maggie had spent decades protecting her, now she was protecting herself. And when Brianna came for help, the paper trail would answer for her. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The fire didn't lie. Neither did she. Smoke met Maggie at the threshold, like an uninvited guest, sharp and acrid, curling into her sinuses before she could set down her keys. She stood in the cool hush of the foyer, every sense narrowing toward the faint pop of heat somewhere beyond the French doors. Outside, a lighter clicked. Once, twice. She crossed the hardwoods, past photographs that had kept their secrets for decades, and stepped into the blinding afternoon. The manicured backyard shimmered in late summer heat, the air thick enough to taste. Near the rusting metal trash fire bin, Brianna stood with one hip cocked, thumb flicking the wheel of a lime green lighter. The bin's low orange flames licked at something pale and crumpled. Maggie's eyes locked on it, a scrap of silk, its once ivory sheen now puckered and curling. Her breath caught. Vintage silk, the last anniversary gift her husband had ever given her, bought in a boutique that wrapped its treasures in tissue paper and treated fabric like memory. She could still recall the dress's whispering hem against her legs, the way it held light without glare. Why? The word left her lips level, almost cold. Brianna didn't flinch. It was ugly. It was intentional. A cicada shrilled in the oak above, a sound so steady it felt like mockery. Maggie took in her daughter's glossy ponytail, the shimmer of sweat along her hairline, the faint trace of coconut body spray tangled with the sharper bite of lighter fluid. 34 years old, yet performing the tantrum of a teenager. Somewhere beyond the fence, a sprinkler hissed into its rotation. Maggie didn't argue. She didn't ask again. She simply stood until the last scrap blackened into nothing. Then she turned, stepping back inside, and letting the French doors close with the softest click. The smoke smell clung to her like an accusation. In the study, she knelt at the narrow safe tucked behind framed degrees. The keypad blinked awake, and the heavy door yielded. Inside, labeled folders in her careful hand. One blue tab, read Brianna. It was thicker than the rest. She pulled it free and opened it on the desk. Credit card statements with Maggie's name as co-signer. Debt notices Maggie had quietly covered. Emails from banks thanking her for assistance. No one had ever thanked her for the cost. The kitchen faucet ran, then shut off. Footsteps creaked overhead. Maggie slid the folder back, restored the safe to its quiet lock, and walked through the house, checking the batteries and a smoke detector as if the small act could balance the ledger. Night settled over the neighborhood in a soft grid of porch lights. From the couch, Brianna scrolled through her phone, app chimes puncturing the calm. Maggie sat across the room in her armchair, framed by the lamplight's warm cone, staring at a silver-framed photograph, her in that dress, her husband's hand steady at her back. She remembered the rustle of silk, the way it had made the air itself feel attentive. "Oh look, new drop already," Brianna said, thumbs moving fast. Maggie didn't have to look to know the purchases were hitting the card tied to her own name. Maggie opened her leather-bound journal, slipping a printout of her pristine credit score into the back pocket. She smoothed the paper with the side of her hand, the lemon scent from her desk oil clinging faintly to her fingers. In the kitchen, the freezer door sighed open. "You're being dramatic," Brianna called, metal spoon clinking against a carton. "It's not like I burned a person." Maggie rose, her knees steady. She crossed to the small sitting room where the landline still waited, a relic for storms. Her hand rested on the receiver, feeling the slow build of resolve. Some matches you strike loud, others you strike in silence. She lifted the phone and dialed. The mechanical clicks felt satisfyingly deliberate. Heather answered on the second ring, her voice warm but alert. Maggie watched her reflection in the darkened window, a faint outline of a woman who knew the weight of every choice she'd ever made. Still have that lawyer friend who does credit damage recovery. The bell above Heather's boutique door gave a single delicate chime as Maggie stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen, the kind of curated scent that made people reach for their wallets. Sunlight spilled across rows of dresses on slender racks, each one a curated whisper from another decade. Heather looked up from the counter, her reading glasses low on her nose. "Well, if it isn't Charlotte's most composed widow," she said, smiling, though her eyes quickly narrowed. "You've got that don't mess with me look. What happened?" Maggie set a folded garment bag on the counter and unzipped it just enough for Heather to see the blackened scrap she'd brought as proof. "It used to be silk," Maggie said evenly. "Vintage. I need a valuation." Heather's hand hovered above the fabric, careful not to touch. "Is this?" She stopped herself, straightened and disappeared into the back. A moment later she returned with a laminated appraisal guide and a faintly dramatic sigh. "This cut, early 80s custom tailoring. I'd put it at $2,400, minimum." Maggie didn't blink. "And if it were destroyed on purpose?" Heather removed her glasses. "You've got receipts?" Maggie nodded. "I do." Heather's voice lowered. "Then she didn't just throw a tantrum. She committed destruction of property. Civil court loves a good paper trail." The words sat in Maggie's mind like chess pieces clicking into place. She thanked Heather, zipped the garment bag, and left without browsing. The boutique door shut softly behind her, but the decision in her mind had already slammed into place. At home, she bypassed the safe and went instead to a narrow drawer in her desk labeled Brianna's bills. The file was a thick ledger of old rescues, late credit card statements, final notices with red stamps, medical bills Maggie had negotiated down and paid in full. She'd covered overdrafts, co-signed leases, and written checks that never got acknowledged. The drawer smelled faintly of old paper and printer ink, a reminder of how long this pattern had been running. This time she wasn't paying. By late afternoon she was in a quiet second-floor office above a dry cleaner's shop, sitting across from Ron Wexley. He was in his early 60s, silver hair slicked neatly back, wearing a navy vest that looked more functional than fashionable. His desk was spotless, except for a brass banker's lamp and a neat stack of forms. "You're looking for damage," he said, without preamble, leaning back in his chair. "I'm looking for accuracy," Maggie corrected. Ron steepled his fingers. "One phone call won't ruin a credit score. That's amateur hour. But 5 precise ones? Different story. You target the right levers, lenders, bureaus, verification systems. She won't be able to open a pack of gum on credit." For the first time in days, Maggie felt the corner of her mouth lift. "Let's light a different kind of match." Ron's smile was quick and approving. "We'll start with the credit card company she uses the most. Then the department store card. Then the bank that holds her personal line of credit. Each one with the same story: co-signer removal, credit exposure review, fraud flag, if applicable. They'll panic before she does." They set the first steps in motion before Maggie left his office. She signed 2 forms, handed over photocopies of her ID, and walked out feeling lighter, not from relief, but from the knowledge that her retaliation had structure. Evening descended in a slow wash of gold across Charlotte's streets. Maggie returned home to find Brianna sprawled on the couch with her laptop, shopping bags from earlier in the week still scattered on the floor. The TV murmured in the background, a reality show laugh track blurring with the faint hum of cicadas outside. Maggie didn't speak to her. She didn't even linger in the room. In her study, she poured herself a glass of iced tea, the condensation beating cold against her fingers. She opened her journal again, not to write, but to mark a mental line between before and after. Down the hall, she heard Brianna's laptop ping. Once, twice. Then the tone of her daughter's voice shifted from lazy distraction to sharp confusion. "What the hell?" Brianna muttered. The click of keys grew faster, more frantic. From the doorway, Maggie caught the glow of the laptop screen, Brianna's retail account. Bold red letters splashed across it. Your available credit limit has been reduced by 50%. Maggie took a sip of her tea, the ice clinking softly against the glass. It had begun. By mid-morning, Maggie was parked downtown in front of the glass and steel building, where she had once closed insurance claims with precision and grace. Now she was here to burn something else down, quietly, cleanly. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and roasted coffee from the cafe tucked in the corner. She crossed to the elevator, the sound of her heels clipping against the floor sharp and controlled. On the 22nd floor, a familiar voice called her name. Alana Park emerged from behind a frosted glass partition, dark hair swept back, tailored navy blazer perfectly fitted. Maggie Rollins, she said with genuine warmth. It's been too long. What brings you here? Maggie followed her into a private office, the blinds drawn just enough to filter the sunlight into pale ribbons. She waited until the door shut before answering. I want my name gone from every joint account, every cosign, every possible link to my daughter's credit. Alana's brows lifted slightly, though she didn't look surprised. Maggie had built her career on measured, deliberate requests. Everything, every last link. Alana turned to her computer, the soft clicking of keys. The only sound for a moment. You've still got her on your department store card. The bank's personal line of credit. And she scrolled further. A small business starter account she opened 3 years ago. That one's in poor standing. Maggie kept her hands folded in her lap, nails neat, voice steady. Scrub me from all of them. Today, the bank's internal system hummed to life. Alana filed the cosigner removal for each account, marking them as relationship separation and tagging them for credit exposure review. Maggie watched the digital connections unravel one by one, as if cutting threads from an old unwanted quilt. You'll get alerts now, Alana said, leaning back. Anytime a payment is late, an overdraft hits, or she applies for new credit using your details, fraud flag included. Maggie nodded. I want every alert. I don't care if it's for a $10 payment. The process took less than an hour. When Alana printed the final confirmation, she slid it across the desk with a small knowing smile. You always were surgical. Maggie stood, smoothing the crease of her blazer. This isn't surgery, it's fire prevention. Back home, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Brianna's car was gone. Maggie settled into her study, setting the printed confirmations in the folder marked Brianna. The folder was now a strange kind of insurance policy, one that paid in peace of mind instead of cash. It didn't take long for the first spark to catch. Less than 3 hours later, her phone buzzed with an email notification from the bank. Payment declined. Designer subscription box. The message was sterile, corporate, but Maggie could almost hear the tone Brianna would take when she discovered it. Part outrage, part disbelief that money wasn't bending to her will. Maggie didn't delete the email. She printed it, hole-punched it, and slid it into the folder. By early evening, the house filled with the sound of a front door closing harder than necessary. Brianna stomped into the kitchen, phone in hand. Some idiot company thinks my payment didn't go through. I called them and they said to check with my bank. She made air quotes big enough to catch dust motes in the air. Maggie stirred the pot on the stove without looking up. Strange. Brianna huffed, opened the fridge, and slammed it shut. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, frowned, then slipped into the living room without another word. The sound of rapid typing followed. Maggie's own phone vibrated again, the same tone she'd set years ago for high-priority alerts. She picked it up from the counter, expecting another overdraft notice. It wasn't. The screen displayed new credit application alert, $15,000 personal loan, applicant, Brianna Rollins, co-applicant, Margaret Rollins. For the first time that day, Maggie felt the air shift around her, the kind of subtle change before a thunderstorm, when everything is waiting for the first strike. She set the phone down slowly, as though placing a match on the edge of a powder trail. The email alert still glowed on Maggie's phone when she slid into Ron Wexley's office the next morning. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she placed a printed copy of the $15,000 loan application on his desk like it was an exhibit in court. Ron adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the form. His mouth tugged sideways into something between a smirk and a wince. Your name as co-applicant. Her signature for yours, and he tapped the final page, an IP address logged from your home network. That's not just fraud, Maggie. That's felony-level fraud. Maggie lowered herself into the chair across from him. So what happens if we don't go for the jugular? What if we test her smoke tolerance first? Ron leaned back, eyes narrowing. Apply just enough heat, and she'll think the whole building's about to go up. Fine. But we do it smart. Paper trail, timestamps, copies in triplicate. They made their first move before the hour was out. Ron sent a secure message to Detective Klein, a soft-spoken investigator Maggie had worked with during her insurance days. Within 20 minutes, her phone buzzed with Klein's reply, low-priority case, but documented and valid. Bring everything in. That afternoon, Maggie walked into the station carrying a neat folder loan application, her real signature for comparison, the IP address report. Klein studied each page carefully, his reading glasses sliding halfway down his nose. You could press charges now, he said. But I'm guessing you've got a longer game. I do. He nodded, stapled her paperwork into an evidence packet, and handed her a copy. Then I'll make sure this is on record. Quiet but permanent. By the time she got home, the house smelled faintly of rosemary and garlic. She'd set a roast in the slow cooker that morning. She unpacked groceries, poured herself a glass of water, and heard the familiar thud of Brianna's car door outside. Brianna breezed into the kitchen, phone in hand, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the fading light. You look busy, she said, glancing at the counter. Dinner's at 6, Maggie replied. Nothing more. They sat across from each other at the table an hour later. Maggie ladled potatoes onto her plate, her posture calm, even as she knew the police had just logged her daughter's forged signature into their system. Brianna chattered about a sale at the mall, how she might upgrade her phone soon. Maggie let her words drift past like weather reports. After the dishes were cleared, Maggie retreated to her study. She pulled a blank certified mail envelope from her desk, then began drafting a letter to the credit bureau, formally contesting the unauthorized loan application. Her pen moved with deliberate precision, each line another stitch in a seam Brianna would never unpick. The printer whirred softly, spitting out 2 clean copies, one for the bureau, one for her records. She sealed the envelope, pressed the return address label into place, and set it on the hall table where she'd see it in the morning. Just after 9, her phone chimed with a text from Heather. Got something for you. Dropping it by tonight. 15 minutes later, Heather stood on the porch holding an empty dress bag. The fabric was thick, glossy with a brass zipper that gleamed under the porch light. Figured you might want this, Heather said softly. Not for storage, for symbolism. Maggie took it, feeling the weightless space inside, the absence that still managed to be heavy. It'll do, she said, and meant it. When Heather left, Maggie hung the bag in her closet, right where the vintage silk had once lived. It stood out among the rest, a silent placeholder for something that would never be returned. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, the house quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Then, almost without thinking, she crossed to the far corner of the closet and crouched. Her hand slid beneath a stack of folded blankets until her fingers found the cool edge of a small drawer built into the baseboard. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was an old security camera, compact, black, still intact from the days she'd used it to monitor her home while traveling. The memory card slot was empty, but the lens was uncracked. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the possibility settle in her chest like an ember about to catch. The hum of the house seemed to fade as she looked at it. She smiled faintly and set it on the desk. The old security camera whirred faintly when Maggie plugged it in, like a memory clearing its throat. She'd half expected it to be dead, dust in the circuits, Battery corroded, but the screen flickered to life, its tiny lens greeting her with a pale fisheye view of her closet from months ago. The playback folder was neatly date-stamped, each file a still moment of her private world. She scrolled until she found the day. The date glared at her from the corner of the screen like a witness pointing across a courtroom. Maggie hit play. There was Brianna, backlit by the late afternoon sun, spilling through the bedroom window. She wasn't rifling for clothes, she was pulling one deliberate hanger from the rack. The vintage silk dress slid free, its pale fabric catching the light. Brianna held it up, studied it with a half smile, then bunched it in her fists. The next moments were both surreal and surgical. Brianna moving into the hallway, descending the stairs, crossing the living room. The angle changed as she entered the backyard. She laughed, an unbothered high easy sound, and tossed the dress into the trash fire bin. The flames caught it immediately, flaring bright. Maggie froze the frame on Brianna's face just as the fabric vanished in the blaze. When Ron Wexley saw the footage an hour later, his eyes narrowed, then widened in a slow arc. "This," he said, tapping the laptop screen, "is clean, time-stamped, and undeniable. We can press charges for malicious destruction and property loss. Or," he leaned back, voice lowering, "we can trade it." Maggie didn't look away from the paused image of her daughter's smiling face. Trade it. The leverage took shape in minutes. Ron formatted the video file, trimmed it to the exact sequence, and renamed it Insurance Claim Evidence, Destruction of Property. "Send it to her," he said, "and nothing else. Let her fill in the blanks." At her kitchen counter that night, Maggie attached the file to an email addressed to Brianna's personal account. No explanation, no greeting, just the subject line. As Ron had written it, she hit send. The reaction came faster than she'd expected. 15 minutes later, Brianna's footsteps pounded down the hallway. She burst into the study, cheeks flushed, phone clutched like a weapon. "You're spying on me?" she demanded. Maggie closed the ledger she'd been reading. "You filmed your cruelty," she said evenly. "I just saved a copy." Brianna's eyes darted, calculating, defensive, searching for the right place to land her outrage. "That's God, you're twisted. You don't even know how to forgive. You don't erase something by burning it," Maggie interrupted. "You just make it smaller and easier to carry." Brianna's lips pressed into a thin line before she spun on her heel and left the room. The bedroom door upstairs slammed, rattling the frame. By the following morning, Ron had already drafted a civil claim. Emotional damages. Property loss. Nothing that would put Brianna in jail. Maggie wasn't after prison time, but enough to pin her to a legal wall. The kind of paperwork that wouldn't disappear from the public record for years. "We file if she doesn't back down," Ron said over the phone. "Even if she does, this alone will keep her off balance. Every time she applies for anything, she'll wonder if the claim shows up." Maggie felt the corners of her resolve harden into something immovable. The video wasn't just proof, it was architecture, a structure under which she could build the rest of her retaliation. That afternoon, she watched Brianna leave for errands in her aging sedan, music thumping faintly from inside. The sun flashed off the windshield as it disappeared around the bend of their street. An hour later, the sound of the garage door opening was followed by the slam of the driver's door, and then the sharp edge of disbelief in her daughter's voice. "You've got to be kidding me," Brianna said to no one in particular, standing in the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I just tried to renew. No, my address hasn't changed. What the hell is identity instability supposed to mean?" She listened, frowning deeper. "So you're saying I can't renew my car insurance like at all, until I get this fixed? And that could take months." Maggie kept her back to her, pouring tea into a cup, the faint curl of steam rising between them. Brianna hung up without saying goodbye to whoever was on the line. Her voice came sharp and uneven now. "Mom, did you do something?" Maggie took a slow sip, the porcelain warm against her palms. She didn't answer. The morning began with a slam of cabinet doors. Maggie didn't look up from her coffee, as Brianna muttered into her phone in the hallway. "Yeah, I'm trying to reopen it," Brianna said, her tone sharpened by disbelief. "No, I didn't close it. It was closed for me. A pause, then louder. What does cosigner removal even mean? Maggie turned the page of her newspaper slowly, the faint rustle almost drowning the sound of her daughter's growing frustration. She knew exactly what it meant. Her separation notices to all three major credit bureaus had gone through. Each one had been filed cleanly, formally, and without room for reversal. Her name was no longer tethered to any of Brianna's open accounts. By the time Brianna stormed out for work, Maggie had already dialed Alana Park's direct line. Everything processed? Maggie asked. Completely. Alana confirmed, and I went one step further, added a fraud notation to her file. From now on, any loan or credit application will require in-person verification, government ID, and a secondary proof of address. No more online approvals in under 5 minutes. Maggie smiled faintly into her coffee. Perfect. The rest of the morning she devoted to a task she'd been saving: the insurance claim for the destroyed dress. She retrieved the original boutique receipt, the appraisal Heather had provided, and the still images from the video Ron had clipped. On the claim form, she wrote in steady block letters, "Vintage silk, appraised at $2,400. Total loss due to intentional destruction." The paper felt cool under her hand, the ink precise and deliberate. When she finished, she placed the claim in a manila envelope and set it beside the door for the afternoon mail. At 2 o'clock, Ron called. "Got updates on her debt spiral," he said. 3 active credit cards, all near the limit. 2 are 30 days from default, the third 48 hours away from hitting 60 days late. Maggie could hear him flipping through his notes on the other end. Also, the department store card you had removed her from. They reported her account as restricted access. That's credit speak for don't trust her with a dime. The roast she'd put in the oven for dinner filled the house with the smell of rosemary and slow-cooked meat. Maggie poured herself a glass of water and walked into the study. She opened her journal, and with the same calm precision as every other step of this plan, printed her own credit score from the bank's portal. It was pristine, unblemished, untouched, and high enough to secure anything she'd ever want. She folded the sheet neatly and slid it into the journal's back pocket, smoothing it flat like a keepsake. By late afternoon, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street outside. Maggie was in the kitchen arranging fresh herbs in a small vase when her phone buzzed across the counter. It wasn't an email alert this time. It was Heather. "Pick up," Heather said when Maggie answered. "You need to see what your daughter just posted." Maggie's hand stilled over the sprigs of thyme. "Posted where?" "Everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. And it's not just a rant, she's showing paperwork." Heather's voice dropped. "Your paperwork." Maggie's pulse didn't spike, but her grip on the vase tightened just enough for the stems to shift. Heather exhaled through the line. "I'm sending you the link. You'll understand why I called." The phone buzzed again in Maggie's hand. Heather's message. The link blinking on the screen like an unopened warning. She set the vase down slowly, wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, and tapped the link. The video opened with Brianna's face filling the frame, lashes thick, mouth painted cherry red, voice pitched high with righteous outrage. "So my mother's sabotaging my credit," she said, the phone camera wobbling slightly as she adjusted her grip. "Because I burned her old prom dress." "Yeah, you heard me, prom dress. It's insane." Maggie watched from the kitchen counter, the phone propped against the coffee maker. The background in Brianna's shot was messy, half-unpacked shopping bags, a laundry pile, and the lighting was harsh enough to make her squint. But she spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the world would side with her. "She's calling banks, pulling her name off accounts, freezing everything," Brianna went on. "Like who does that to their own kid? Over something that happened weeks ago." She rolled her eyes, the universal language of dismissal. Maggie didn't bother watching to the end before tapping the share icon and sending the link to Ron Wexley. The message was brief. "Add to file." Ron's reply came within 2 minutes. "Perfect. Public admission time-stamped. This is gold." By noon the video had climbed past 5,000 views. The comments were split. some siding with Brianna, calling Maggie controlling and petty, others suggesting Brianna grow up and learn how credit works. Maggie read only enough to understand the trend before closing the app. In a corner office across town, Alana Park was already at her computer. The video paused on Brianna's opening statement. "You know financial institutions monitor social media now, right?" she said when Maggie picked up her call. "We flag this kind of behavior. It shows volatility and risk." "Flag it," Maggie said simply. "Already did." That afternoon, Maggie carried a leather portfolio into the station to meet Detective Klein. His office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, a steady hum from the overhead lights. She laid the folder on his desk and opened it like a case exhibit. Printed screenshots of the video, the photo of the charred dress remains, Heather's appraisal slip, the original boutique receipt, and still frames from the security footage. Klein adjusted his glasses and reviewed each piece without hurry. "You weren't exaggerating," he said at last. "This is textbook misdemeanor arson and malicious destruction of property. And now she's gone and recorded a confession for public consumption." "I'm not asking for handcuffs," Maggie said. "Just a record, something that stays put." Klein nodded, pulling a form toward him. "Then we'll open a formal report. It won't get her arrested, but it will follow her background checks, insurance applications, the works." The sound of his pen scratching across paper was oddly satisfying. He stapled the incident report, slid a copy into a file, and handed Maggie the reference number. "You're thorough," he said. "Occupational hazard," she replied, tucking the number into her portfolio. By the time she returned home, the roast in the oven filled the air with a savory weight. Maggie poured herself a glass of water, took it to her study, and set the incident report neatly in the Brianna folder. She didn't need to check the video's view count again. Its damage was self-sustaining now. Upstairs, Brianna's footsteps moved back and forth, punctuated by the opening and closing of dresser drawers. The house had that quiet tension of two storms circling the same block. A few minutes later, a sharp intake of breath broke the silence. "Oh no, no, no." Brianna's voice carried down the stairs. There was the frantic tapping of phone keys, then a louder, panicked tone. "This has to be wrong." Maggie stayed in her chair listening. In the living room, Brianna stood frozen, phone in one hand, the other clamped to her forehead. Her eyes were wide, voice breaking as she read from the screen. 504. "Are you kidding me?" Maggie sipped her water, letting the number hang in the air like smoke. By the next morning, Brianna's voice carried from the living room in short, clipped bursts. "What do you mean you're canceling? We had a deal." "No, that's not. No, it's just a stupid video." Her pacing made the hardwood groan in steady complaint. Maggie, in the kitchen, poured herself coffee and let the scent settle her. She didn't need to hear the rest of the call to know the freelance design gig Brianna had bragged about last week was gone. "I can send you examples." Hello. Silence. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the hollow kind, the one that comes after a door closes for good. An hour later, Maggie passed by the dining table and saw Brianna hunched over her phone, thumbs flying. A group chat was open, full of bright icons but no recent replies. Messages sent hours ago. "Anyone around? We should go out." Sat unanswered. At the top, a notification banner popped up and vanished before Brianna could tap it. When she went upstairs to shower, her phone buzzed on the table. Maggie didn't touch it, but the voicemail preview glowed across the screen. "You might want to lay low." That evening, the house was still, the roast chicken on the counter cooling in its pan. Maggie set 2 plates, poured water and sat down without ceremony. Brianna slid into the chair opposite her, hair damp from the shower, face scrubbed clean of makeup. For the first time in days, Maggie looked directly at her. "The dress you burned was the last gift your father gave me." Brianna blinked, then tilted her head slightly, like she'd been handed a puzzle piece she didn't want. "Why do you care about something so ugly and old?" The words didn't sting, they simply confirmed the distance. Maggie placed her fork down, folded her napkin, and stood without a word. She crossed to the sideboard, opened the top drawer and removed a plain white envelope. in neat handwriting across the front, "Consequence Ledger." She set it on the table beside Brianna's plate and walked out of the room. Upstairs, Maggie heard the faint tear of paper as Brianna opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet listing, in bullet points, each step Maggie had taken: account removals, fraud flags, pending insurance claim, documented destruction of property. At the bottom, in ink darker than the rest, "This is the short version." Later that night, Maggie sat at her desk while Ron's email arrived. "Formal request sent. Certified mail. She can pay $2,400 to settle, or face court. Your call if she refuses." Maggie replied simply, "Proceed." The next morning was overcast, the kind of flat light that made the house feel quieter than usual. Brianna didn't come down for breakfast. Maggie was in the study, filing the insurance claim copy into the Brianna folder, when she heard a sharp intake of breath from upstairs. Then, footsteps, quick, unsteady, down the hall. Brianna appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, the glow from the screen casting a cold light over her face. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Maggie glanced up. "About what?" Brianna's grip tightened on the phone. "My lease renewal day," she broke off, scrolling furiously, then shoved the screen forward. The email was short, clinical. "We regret to inform you that your lease will not be renewed at the end of the current term. Background check updates have necessitated this decision." Her voice cracked. "I've got 60 days to find a new place." Maggie didn't flinch, didn't rise from her chair. She reached for the next document on her desk, as though the conversation were no more urgent than an unanswered letter. Brianna stood there for a moment, waiting for something, a reaction, an offer, even a hint of regret. She got none. Brianna stood in the doorway, clutching her phone like it might explain itself if she held it tightly enough. Her voice had the raw edge of panic. "They're not renewing my lease. 60 days, Mom. That's it." Maggie set down her pen, meeting her daughter's eyes without hurry. "Do you remember who co-signed your lease 3 years ago?" Brianna blinked, suspicion flashing. "You?" "Yes. And do you remember the separation notices I filed? The fraud flags? When the building ran its background check for renewal, my name was gone, and your record wasn't clean enough to stand on its own. You did this on purpose." "I removed myself from liability," Maggie said evenly. "The rest was just the truth catching up." Brianna's voice climbed into a near shout. "You're destroying my life." Maggie leaned back in her chair, the light from the window pooling across her desk. "You started with mine." The silence that followed was thick, only the low hum of the refrigerator cutting through. Brianna's hands shook, whether from anger or fear Maggie didn't care to guess. "No spare room?" Brianna asked, her voice smaller now. "No backup plan," Maggie said. Brianna's mouth opened like she might argue, then closed again. She turned, stomping up the stairs, her steps hard and deliberate, as if volume could undo what paperwork had already sealed. Later that afternoon, Heather appeared at the door with a dress bag draped over her arm. "Thought you might like this," she said, stepping inside without ceremony. Maggie unzipped the bag. The dress was vintage. Yes, but not the same. It had a softer cream color, a slightly different cut, the kind of elegance that didn't need to announce itself. Heather didn't speak. She didn't have to. Maggie ran her hand over the fabric. "It's not the original." "No," Heather said. "But it's whole." Maggie zipped the bag shut, and hung it in the closet where the empty one had been. For a brief moment, she let herself imagine her husband's hand on her back again, the rustle of silk under warm light. The moment passed, but the steadiness it left behind stayed. By the following morning, Ron had sent her an update, drafted small claims filing. "If she doesn't settle in full, we proceed." Attached was the same neat figure, $2,400, along with the stack of supporting documents Maggie had so carefully curated. "She's running out of exits," Ron told her over the phone. "No clean credit, a public incident report, and now no lease renewal. If she doesn't pay, court will just make it permanent." "That's fine," Maggie said. "Permanent is the point." The day moved quietly, laundry folded, bills paid, the kind of domestic rhythm Maggie had always preferred. The hum of the dryer was still fading when the phone rang. She recognized the bank's number instantly. Mrs. Rollins, the voice on the other end began, polite but careful. We wanted to confirm a new checking account application made today under your previous address. We suspected potential fraud. Maggie felt the calm settle in before she even answered. And the applicant, there was a pause. The shuffle of papers. Brianna Rollins. Maggie's gaze drifted to the desk where the Brianna folder lay open, thick with printed emails, receipts, and now this. Decline it, she said. Mark the address as restricted. Yes, ma'am. We'll update the fraud notation and file the alert with all reporting systems. When she hung up, the quiet of the house felt different, not empty, but sealed. Her daughter wasn't just struggling now. She was shut out from lenders, from leases, from the soft trust she'd once burned as carelessly as that silk dress. The ember Maggie had lit weeks ago had spread, not in a flash, but with slow, deliberate reach, until the entire structure of Brianna's independence was smoke, and Maggie had never lifted more than a pen. The morning after the bank call, Maggie sat at her desk with a mug of coffee cooling beside her, pulling up the fraud alert forms. Each click, each field filled, was its own small lock turning in place. She listed her current address, the previous one Brianna had tried to use, and flagged both for identity monitoring. Block all new account openings tied to these addresses. When she hit submit, the confirmation page glowed like a sealed vault. Minutes later, Alana's name appeared on her caller ID. I got your note, Alana said without preamble. I've added a residence freeze to your profile. That means even if someone uses your address, it'll be kicked to manual review before anything's approved. And I tagged it for piggyback prevention. No one's building credit off your roof again. Good, Maggie said, leaning back. The quiet confidence in Alana's tone matched the steadiness in her own chest. That afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, Maggie found an old canvas tote that had been sitting in the back seat of Brianna's car for months. Inside was a hardback library book, its dust jacket worn at the edges. She flipped it open, due date 6 months ago. She could almost hear the overdue fees stacking themselves like coins. At the library, the return kiosk beeped sharply when she slid the book inside. The clerk scanned the barcode, then raised an eyebrow. Over $100 in late fees. Are you? Not mine, Maggie interrupted. But you can mark it returned. The walk back to her car was brisk, the late summer air thick with the smell of hot asphalt. She slid into the driver's seat and let herself sit there a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing evenly. One more debt Brianna would pay, one more she wouldn't absorb. Her phone rang before she started the engine. Detective Klein's voice was calm but firm. We're moving the case to active status. Between the video, the motive, and her own public statements, we've got enough to keep it open indefinitely. It won't land her in cuffs unless you want it to, but it'll follow her anywhere she applies or registers. Leave it open, Maggie said. That evening, she met Ron in his office. He slid a crisp document across the desk. Affidavit of financial separation, he said. It states you are not liable for her debts, current or future. Once filed, it's binding. Maggie picked up the pen, the weight of it satisfying. She signed without hesitation, her signature a deliberate slash against the white page. Ron notarized it on the spot, the stamp pressing into the paper with a sound like a door shutting. Back home, she began sorting through the boxes in the upstairs closet, the ones that had followed her from her marriage, through widowhood, into this quiet war. She pulled out old photographs, kept the ones worth keeping, and fed the duplicates into the shredder. The hum of the blades was low and constant, the strips of paper falling into the bin like pale confetti. A small stack of letters from her husband stayed untouched, tucked into a wooden box. Everything else, she evaluated in seconds. Keep, toss, shred. It was not just a purge of paper, it was a reclaiming of square inches in her home, of oxygen in her own life. She was sealing the final trash bag when the answering machine in the kitchen clicked on. Maggie, it's me. Brianna's voice was quieter than usual, the edges worn down. You win. There was a long pause, just the faint static hum of the line. Can I come home? Maggie stood in the hallway, the bag of shredded paper still in her hands, listening to the silence after the click. The machine's red light blinked steadily, waiting for her to press play again. The red light on the answering machine kept blinking through dinner, a steady pulse in the quiet kitchen. Maggie waited until the dishes were washed, dried, and stacked before walking over to it. She pressed play again, listened to Brianna's voice, small, tired, almost pleading. Say the words, you win. Can I come home? Maggie's thumb hovered over the save button. Instead, she pressed delete. The click was sharp and final. In the study, she took a piece of stationery from the drawer, the thick cream paper she reserved for notes that needed to be remembered. In her neat, deliberate handwriting, she wrote, your choices set this fire. No salutation, no signature. She slipped the paper into an envelope, sealed it, and placed it on the corner of her desk, where the afternoon light caught it. The next morning her phone buzzed with an email from Ron, final demand letter sent. She has 10 days to pay $2,400, or we file in court. If she refuses, garnishment is on the table. By early afternoon, Brianna's response arrived, not as words but as a single emoji. Maggie stared at it for a long moment, the small icon glowing on her phone screen. Then she tapped forward and sent it to Ron with no comment. His reply was almost immediate, adding it to the packet. That evening, Heather called to remind her about the small gathering she was hosting. A few friends, light food, good wine. Wear the new dress, Heather said. Let people see you the way I do. Maggie arrived just after sunset. The boutique's back patio had been strung with warm Edison bulbs, the air carrying the mingled scent of lavender from the planters and something buttery from the kitchen. She wore the vintage replacement dress Heather had given her, the cream fabric moving with a soft rustle when she walked. Conversations paused briefly as she entered, not from shock, but from the quiet acknowledgement that she looked untouchable. Heather handed her a glass of wine and leaned in. You're glowing, she said. It's just the lighting, Maggie replied, but she knew it wasn't. The evening passed in warm fragments, laughter at one table, a discussion about a local art show at another. Maggie listened more than she spoke, content to let the soft music and clinking of glasses fill the spaces between words. For a few hours there was no smoke, no debt, no calculated moves, just the present moment. She left just before 10, the night air cool against her skin. The street was quiet when she pulled into her driveway, the only sound the chirp of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Inside, she set her purse on the console table and noticed the stack of mail waiting in the basket. She sorted through it absently, flyers, bills, a bank statement, until her hand paused on a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the Mecklenburg County Court. The weight of it was different. She carried it to the kitchen, set it on the counter, and slid it open with the same small knife she used for citrus. Inside, a notice of action, plaintiff Brianna Rollins, defendant Margaret Rollins, allegation emotional cruelty resulting in financial hardship. The paper was crisp, the ink still smelling faintly of toner. Maggie read it twice, then set it down on the counter beside the unopened bottle of wine she'd brought home from Heather's. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the windows before fading. Maggie stood in the kitchen, the house silent around her, the court notice lying between her and the rest of the night. She picked it up once more, turned it over in her hands, and let the corners bend slightly between her fingers. The bridge was gone, and now, apparently, she was being sued for not building another one. The Mecklenburg County Small Claims courtroom smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to every government building. Fluorescent lights hummed above, their flat glow washing the color out of everything except the mahogany bench where the judge sat. Maggie adjusted her blazer and watched Brianna 2 tables over, her daughter's hair perfectly styled, her nails freshly painted, her expression set in an imitation of righteous injury. When the clerk called their case, Brianna launched in first. Her voice trembled just enough to seem rehearsed. My mother, she began, has engaged in a prolonged pattern of financial abuse, freezing my accounts, contacting my employers, intentionally ruining my credit. She painted herself as the victim of cruelty disguised as concern. Words like emotional harm and toxic control drifted across the room, drawing a few sympathetic glances from strangers waiting for their own hearings. Brianna's hands moved as she spoke, palms up, pleading to an invisible jury. Maggie let her speak uninterrupted. She'd learned long ago that silence could be its own argument. When Brianna sat down, flushed from the effort, Ron stood. His suit was plain but pressed, his voice carrying a calm authority that immediately reset the room. Your Honor, we're not here on speculation or opinion, he said. We're here on documented fact. He opened a binder with the precision of a surgeon making a first incision. Out came receipts. Original purchase slips for the vintage silk dress, Heather's written appraisal, photographs of the charred remains. He laid them out on the evidence table like a carefully arranged exhibit. Next, screenshots of Brianna's own public video posts, each date stamped, her words transcribed in bold. Audio logs of her voicemail and text replies followed, including the single fire emoji she'd sent in response to a settlement demand. Finally, Ron cued the security footage. The courtroom's small monitor flickered, showing Brianna in Maggie's backyard, laughing as she tossed the dress into the flames. The silence in the room deepened. The faint hiss of the HVAC seemed louder than before. Ron stepped back. This, he said, gesturing to the monitor, is not the act of someone being financially abused. This is the intentional destruction of property worth over $2,000, followed by repeated fraudulent credit applications using my client's identity. Everything in this folder, he tapped the binder, is verifiable. The judge's gaze shifted to Maggie. Do you wish to speak, Mrs. Rollins? Maggie rose, smoothing her blazer with one hand. She made herself judge and jury. She said, her tone even. I just called the clerk. She sat. The judge leaned back, the file in front of her thick with printed pages. For 10 long minutes, she read silently, her pen occasionally scratching across the margin. Each turn of the page sounded deliberate. Brianna shifted in her chair, glancing toward the gallery, as if searching for some ally who might appear out of thin air. Finally, the judge closed the file. Based on the evidence, I find in favor of the defendant. The plaintiff will pay $2,400 in damages plus court fees. No liability falls on the defendant for any alleged emotional harm. This matter is closed. The clerk's stamp hit the order with a sharp final thud. Brianna's mouth opened, but no words came. Her gaze darted to Maggie, but Maggie was already gathering her bag, her motions efficient, unhurried. She didn't look back as she walked toward the double doors, the muted squeak of her heels swallowed by the sound of the next case being called. In the hallway, Ron caught up with her. You kept it short, he said, almost smiling. Short works, Maggie replied. He reached into his briefcase and handed her a single-page document. This came through while we were in there. Credit score dispute approved. Her file will stay flagged for 7 years. Even if she pays down debt, the note remains. Maggie took the paper, feeling its clean weight in her hand. 7 years. Long enough for the embers to cool. Long enough for the lesson to hold. Brianna's voice carried through the thin morning air like the static of a bad radio signal. What do you mean denied? It's a secured card. Her tone was tight, pitched to sound incredulous, but edged with something rawer. I'm literally offering you money to hold. How is that? Hello. The line must have gone dead, because the next sound Maggie heard was the sharp clatter of Brianna's phone hitting the table. From her seat in the kitchen, Maggie could see the screen still glowing. Across the top, in cold, unapologetic typeface, credit score 488. Brianna slumped into a chair, scrolling through her email like she could will one into existence. Maggie caught glimpses of subject lines as they flashed by. Application denied. We regret to inform you, unable to process request. The rejection was consistent, methodical, and absolute. Her daughter's voice dropped to a mutter. They're not even replying anymore. Maggie took a sip of coffee, its warmth steadying her. She'd already seen the ripple effect, the way lenders ghosted a high-risk borrower, the way every application seemed to hit an invisible wall. This was what permanence looked like. Later that morning, she logged into her own bank account and navigated to the security settings. With a few clicks, she renewed her credit lock, this time with an extra layer blocking all inquiries tied to her name and any known family linkages. No co-signing, no authorized use, no accidental overlaps. The confirmation email hit her inbox almost immediately. Your credit profile is now fully sealed. It was a clean final sentence. That afternoon her phone rang. Detective Klein's voice was as measured as ever. Just wanted to close the loop. The case is officially closed on our end. Warning issued, civil status noted, record on file. It's in the system for anyone who runs her name. Maggie thanked him. She won't like it, he added. But that's not your concern anymore. When the call ended, she felt a quiet exhale leave her chest, less relief, more confirmation that every move had been recorded in the right place, visible to the right people. 2 days later, Maggie stopped by Heather's boutique to pick up a scarf she'd set aside. The scent of cedar and fabric dye welcomed her as she stepped in. Heather, adjusting a mannequin in the front window, turned with a half smile. "Do you feel peace yet?" she asked. Maggie considered the question, fingers brushing the silk of the scarf. "I feel clean." Heather's smile deepened, but she didn't press. That evening, as the light outside turned honey gold, Maggie went to her closet. She pulled out the replacement dress, the one Heather had brought weeks ago, cream and understated. Instead of hanging it back, she carried it to her study, where an empty frame leaned against the wall. She laid the dress on the table and smoothed it flat, her hands moving slowly over the fabric, not to prepare it for wearing, but to preserve it, pressing its folds into place so it could be displayed without ever being touched again. A relic, but not of loss. A marker of reclamation. She worked in silence, the faint scent of fabric and wood polish in the air. When the dress was finally secured behind glass, she stepped back. It wasn't the same as the one Brianna had burned, but it didn't need to be. This one was whole, untouched, safe. The knock of the mail carrier at her door broke the moment. She opened it to find a single envelope, the kind used for official correspondence. No return address, but the weight of it was unmistakable. She slid it open at the kitchen counter. The letter inside was typed, formal and brief. Notice of appeal, plaintiff Brianna Rollins. Her daughter wasn't done. Maggie read the lines twice, then folded the paper neatly and slid it into the Brianna folder without a change in her expression. The appeal could drag on for months, but it wouldn't matter. The court record, the civil judgment, the credit damage, they were already embedded. This wasn't a battle to win again. It was a victory that would simply keep existing. The estate planner's office was quiet enough to hear the soft tick of the wall clock. Maggie sat across from Thomas, a lean man with silver hair and the steady hands of someone who had handled too many family implosions to be surprised by this one. He slid the printed will across the desk. This reflects the changes we discussed. Brianna Rollins, completely removed from all assets, accounts, and executor rights. Maggie read it once, her eyes moving without hurry, the paper smooth beneath her fingertips. "File it," she said. Thomas nodded, stamped the corner with his seal, and stacked the papers in a folder with quiet precision. Final as of today. The sense of weight wasn't emotional, it was logistical, like turning a key in a lock that would never open again. That evening, Maggie returned home, scanned the updated will, and saved the PDF to her desktop. The subject line of the email she sent to herself read, "Peace, not legacy." The next night, Heather and Ron came for dinner. Maggie opened a bottle of red, the cork easing out with a satisfying pop. The table was set with rosemary chicken, roasted vegetables, and a citrus tart cooling on the counter. Heather poured the wine, smiling. To clean breaks, she said. Ron raised his glass. And clean records. They laughed, but the laughter didn't need to touch the past. It stayed anchored in the present, the conversation drifting to city renovations, travel plans, and the boutique's upcoming seasonal sale. No smoke, no fire, just a table of people who knew when to let silence be an ally. In the weeks that followed, Maggie found herself walking past a small vintage resale shop on the corner of 7th and Hawthorne. One afternoon, she stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the warm scent of pressed linen and cedar oil wrapped around her. A woman at the counter looked up. Looking for something special. Looking to help, Maggie said. Within days she was volunteering mending seams, replacing missing buttons, steaming stubborn creases out of skirts that hadn't been worn in decades. Her hands remembered the care her husband had taken when he'd given her that silk dress, the way the fabric had whispered against her skin. Each finished dress got a small tag she'd written herself. Don't destroy what someone loved. Some customers read the tag and smiled without asking. Others didn't notice at all. It didn't matter. The message was there for the one person who might need it someday. One Thursday afternoon, the shop was quiet, the winter light thin against the display windows. Maggie was at the back, stitching a loose hem on a soft gray wool coat, when the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up, expecting a regular. Instead, a stranger, a woman in her 30s with wind-tangled hair and a canvas tote, walked in, holding something in both hands. The air seemed to shift when Maggie saw it. A scrap of fabric, charred along the edges, the once ivory silk stained with ash. The stranger stepped closer, her voice curious but gentle. I found this in a donation bin behind the church. It looked like it used to be beautiful. Is this yours? Maggie's hands stilled on the needle, the coat in her lap suddenly weightless. The woman held the scrap of silk in both hands as though it might crumble. Up close, Maggie could see where the flames had eaten into it. Delicate fibers curled inward, the edges stiff with soot. What remained of the ivory had dulled to a mottled gray, like something pulled from the bottom of a chimney. I found it in the donation bin behind the church, the woman said. Thought maybe it was a remnant someone meant for quilting. But, she hesitated, looking at Maggie as though gauging the weight of her next words. It felt too important to be tossed with the rest. Maggie reached out, her fingertips brushing the edge of the char. The texture was brittle, fragile. The air between them smelled faintly of dust and something older, an echo of the fire that had erased it. Thank you, she said, her voice even. She didn't unfold it there. Instead, she folded it once more, gently, and slid it into her leather bag. The act felt less like accepting a gift and more like taking possession of remains. By the time she left the shop, the winter sun had dropped behind the buildings, turning the street into a ribbon of cold shadow. Her breath showed in the air, small puffs that vanished as quickly as they formed. At home, Maggie set her bag on the kitchen counter and went straight to the study. She unlocked the bottom drawer where the fireproof box waited, its surface cool beneath her hands. Inside, the space was organized and deliberate. Court ruling, credit bureau confirmations, the affidavit of financial separation. She placed the scorched fabric on top of the court ruling, the two artifacts fitting together like cause and effect. The smell of ash lingered for a moment before the lid closed. On her desk, her journal lay open to a fresh page. She took up her fountain pen, the one that left clean, dark lines without blotting, and wrote, "Some fires clear land, others just burn fools." The sentence filled the page with a clarity that felt complete. She set the pen down, closed the journal, and moved to the kitchen. The kettle on the stove began its low hum, building to a whistle. She poured the water over loose leaves in a porcelain cup, the steam curling upward in pale ribbons. The tea was strong, earthy, the kind that settled into the back of her throat. She drank in silence, her eyes drifting toward the living room windows, where the late light spilled across the hardwood. The house felt full, not of people, but of light and order. Everything inside it was hers. When the cup was empty, she rinsed it. set it in the rack, and walked down the hallway. Brianna's old room was the last door on the right. Maggie paused outside it, her hand resting briefly on the knob before she moved on. The lock was still in place, the key in her desk. Inside, the room was bare. No clothes, no photographs, no trace of the chaos it had once held. Just clean walls and an empty floor, sunlight marking a pale square on the carpet. She didn't open the door. She didn't need to. In the quiet, she could still recall the moment this all began, not the fire in the bin, but the look in Brianna's eyes when she'd said it was intentional. That was the spark. Everything after had been a steady, controlled burn. The folder in the fireproof box was proof of that. Every form, every letter, every signature building toward the inevitable end. It wasn't luck that had gotten her here. It was precision. And precision left no smoke. Maggie walked back to the study, sat in her chair, and let the silence stretch out like a long exhale. Somewhere in the city, her daughter was still fighting an appeal that couldn't undo what had been done. The system didn't erase its own records for sentiment's sake. Her credit score sat untouched, perfect, unlinked to anything Brianna could reach. Her home was steady under her feet. Her history was hers alone again. She leaned back, the final sentence forming in her mind with the same crisp certainty as a signature on the right line. She burned my dress with a lighter. I burned her future with a signature.